Laura Pepperwoo, and today we are speaking with Linda Formichelli, who has been a full-time freelance writer since 1997, writing for publications including Women's Day, Family Circle, Psychology Today, Men's Fitness, and Writer's Digest. She has also co-authored 8 books, including The Renegade Writer, a totally unconventional guide to freelance writing success, which she wrote with her partner in crime, Diana Burrell, with whom she also writes and manages therenegadewriter.com. Hi, Linda. Thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Hi. Thanks for having me today.
So I'm excited today to talk to you about getting started for magazines, which is something that you support your family doing and have done for several years now.
Right.
So why don't you give us a little bit about your background and how you got started in freelance magazine writing?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I started in 1997 and I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I ended up getting a master's degree in Slavic linguistics from UC Berkeley.
Wow. Okay.
I know, right? It's so useful. And, I was invited into the PhD program, but I decided that I really wanted to become a writer. So I had a really good idea. I picked up a book on how to write pitches. I wrote a pitch, I sent it out, and I sold it.
Okay. And what was the idea?
It was on how to do informational interviews. So if you're looking for a job, and I just had some experience with that because before I decided to become a writer, I tried all these different informational interviews to see, maybe I wanted to get into publishing or something like that. I didn't want to, but I thought the experience would make a really good article. And I sold that for $500. And I was thinking, well, that's pretty darn nice.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time I was working part-time in an office, and I cut my hours down more and more as I ended up getting more and more assignments. And I finally went full-time freelance in July 1997. I ended up writing for magazines, doing copywriting, and writing books up until about a year ago. And actually, I need to reveal that a year ago, I stopped writing for clients.
Okay.
And now I work on my ebooks and the Renegade Writer blog and teaching classes, and I still write for Writer's Digest magazine.
Okay, fantastic.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great story, and it's almost like a fairy tale, right? Like you write your first pitch and then you get accepted, which I wouldn't think is the sort of natural thing that happens. Many people kind of get their first pitch wrong, or they don't have a good idea. So let's talk about the writers that are watching this, and they're thinking, wow, I want to do that. I want to see myself published in my favorite magazine, and I have this idea. But they don't really know where to start with that first crucial step.
Right.
So what would you recommend for them?
Yeah, the only thing, if you want to write for magazines, the only thing you need to know, first off, is how to write a query letter, which is otherwise known as a pitch, or basically a sales letter that sells your idea.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of places that you can find information on this for free. If you go to the Renegade Writer blog, we have a whole section on query letters. I give away a free ebook on query letters, and then there are books and e-courses and all kinds of things. But I really want to have this caveat that too many people get stuck in the learning process, and they're like, well, I need to learn to write a query. Now I need to learn this, I need to learn that. And they take course after course, and they read book after book. And really, the best way to learn is just, learn as much as you need to get that first query letter out the door, and then just write and write and write and pitch and pitch and pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, my first query letter was accepted, but I was trying to break it in national magazines, and that took me about 3 years, and that I went through some pretty awful pitches.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had kept learning and reading about the query letter process, I never would have gotten there, as opposed to honing my technique through experience.
Mm-hmm. And when you say honing your technique through experience, was that just knowing what was getting accepted by editors, or did you actually get any feedback from those editors telling you what you were doing right and what you were doing wrong?
Yeah, both. Sometimes I would just get a form rejection, and you have to think about that. Okay, why is this getting form rejections? What can I do better? Sometimes I was so persistent. I was sending out so many pitches that I was getting some feedback. And I actually ran across a nice editor from Women's Day magazine, and she said, I really like your pitch, but it's not quite there. This is what I want to see. And she liked the pitch so much that she wanted to use it as an example at a conference of a pitch that was almost but not quite there.
Okay.
And I followed her advice, which was to put more research into the query. And I started writing my queries that way. And all of a sudden, boom, I was in the national magazines, Women's Day, Red Book, Family Circle. So you need to use that feedback. And you can even use lack of feedback. I mean, you're not getting anything from editors, or you're only getting form rejections. That's telling you something.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk again about that first query that you made. Did you have anything in your portfolio at that point to kind of show the editor that you'd written in the past?
The only thing I had was a book review from an academic journal called Language.
Okay.
And it was a book review of a dialectology textbook, and it was so not appropriate as a clip, but that's the only thing I had. So I think effectively you could say I had no clips.
Right, because that's something I wanted to kind of ask you about, is this portfolio catch-22, which is, it's almost like a vicious cycle. An editor naturally wants to see clips, but if you don't have them, then you can't get published, and it's how do you get around that?
The classic catch-22. And I was thinking about your question, and I know 5 different ways that you could get around this. And the first one is, a lot of people tell me I have no clips, but when you dig, they do have clips. It's just that, my clips are 10 years old, so they're too old, or my clips aren't relevant, or the clip wasn't paid for. And those things don't matter. You have to use what you have. If you have an unpaid clip for a newspaper that you wrote 10 years ago, that's your clip. Another thing you could do is write a really kick-butt query letter. Sometimes just a really amazing query will trump the fact that you haven't had any published articles. And I had one student break into Self magazine for, I think it was $1.50 a word, and she had no clips at all. Another one is, if you have the stomach for this, to write for free a little bit, you can write for free for a small magazine you love, or a nonprofit that you're really interested in. And just do it once, just enough to get the clip, and then move on. Another way is to sort of do a warm pitch where you get to know editors on social media like LinkedIn and Twitter, and then you ask if you can pitch them, and then you pitch, and they sort of know you a little bit, so the fact that you have clips isn't so important. And finally, you can send what an editor at Writer's Digest told me about. It's called an on-spec query. An on-spec is when you write an article and you don't have an assignment. So sometimes an editor will ask you to write something on spec, meaning they'll only pay you if they like it. And normally I say don't do this, but if you have no clips at all, sometimes it can help to write up the whole article. And then in your pitch, tell the editor, I wrote up this article for you. Would you like to see it? So it really gets rid of any risk on their part because you've already written the article. So even if it's a magazine that doesn't normally ask for things on spec, they might appreciate this effort.
Okay. I mean, I think that's fantastic advice. You covered
Thank you.
all the bases there. Fantastic. All right. So let's talk about how. So you been writing since 1997, so we're in 2014 now. That's a long time to be coming up with fresh ideas. And it's like anything, right? Like us writing for whatever media, whether it's novel writing or script writing or whatever, you have to have fresh new ideas.
Right.
And magazines don't like to publish the same thing issue in, issue out. So how do you make sure that you come up with exciting topics, or do you just take a new angle on a tried and tested topic, or what's your process there?
Yeah, well, both those things, but let me say that writers should take heart, because after you've been in this career long enough and you start to build up clients that you write for regularly, they'll start coming to you with assignments, so you're no longer in the position of pitching ideas. I think by the time I stopped writing for clients a year ago, I think I hadn't written a pitch in 2 years before that, because my clients would come to me and say, can you write on X for me? And I would just do it. The downside to that is that you're not necessarily really passionate about the idea because you didn't come up with it. But, I'm in business, so people coming to me and my not having to spend time on a pitch is very cost effective. That said, you do, especially at the beginning and for the first, however long in your career, need to come up with really great ideas. And one thing I really recommend is to just read the markets that you want to write for and study them. Study the ads, study the columns, study the articles, and then even read magazines that are outside of your field of expertise, because you might find ideas for a completely different industry or a completely different genre that works in the type of magazine you want to write for.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always out there reading, the Ferret Journal and High Times and, Home Power and things like that, and really gleaning ideas from them. And then once you start reading all these magazines, you'll start to sort of combine ideas in new ways that you're finding in them. For example, I was looking at a lot of women's magazines, and I noticed, and this was in like 1999 or so, I noticed that a lot of them had either orgasm or diet on the cover.
Okay.
And I thought, why don't I combine those? And I pitched an idea that broke into Redbook called the Better Orgasm Diet, about foods that boost your libido.
Nice.
So, but one thing that really stops writers is that they come up with ideas and they brainstorm ideas and they're like, these all stink. And yes, sometimes the ideas that you just come up with off the top of your head are going to stink, but you can often play with them and come up with angles and new ways of looking at them that will fit a particular magazine. So I teach this e-course on how to break into magazines, and the first assignment is to come up with 3 ideas. And invariably, the writer will say, these 3 ideas stink. And I'm like, yes, as is, these 3 ideas are not going to sell. But what if we turn this around into an opposite idea? Or you came up with a bunch of similar ideas and did a roundup, or you took one small slice of this idea. You have to learn how to play with ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I just want to say that when you are coming up with these ideas and you're thinking of ways to reslant them, you need to know that ideas need to be unique and timely.
Mm-hmm.
Unique meaning that they're not something that's all over the place, that the editor has seen a million times before. What do you bring to the table? What can you add to this topic? And then timely is, why does an editor need to run this idea right now, as opposed to 5 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something in the news? Is there a new study? Is there a book coming out on the topic? You need to give the editors reasons that this idea is going to be unique, something she's never seen before, something fresh. We hate that word fresh because editors use it so much.
Mm-hmm.
And something she needs to run right now, and it's really important that she do so.
Okay, and then just to clarify, we're talking about timely, but magazines work so far in advance.
True.
So how do you work around that?
Well, one thing I like to do is go on Amazon and look at what books are going to be published in my topic, 6 months to a year from now, because like you were saying, the big magazines tend to run about 6 months, maybe 4 to 6 months in advance. So that's one good way to come up with something. Oh, this new book is coming out in October 2014, and I want to write an article on that topic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is really difficult with these magazines because a lot of people think they have to have something that's in the news right now. They want to write about the news, and that's not necessarily so. You just need to be tapping into the trends,
mm-hmm.
and you need to think about what's going to be a trend in the future,
right.
not just what's happening right now.
Right. Okay. Got it. Excellent. So you have your fantastic idea that you've honed, and you want to start querying it. What does your research process look like in terms of finding the right market for that publication and finding their guidelines and that sort of thing?
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of writers don't recognize that markets are everywhere. I mean, they look at the newsstand and they think that's it. And the newsstand is a great place to start. You go to Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore or the supermarket,
mm-hmm.
and you see what's out there. And sometimes you'll find a surprise. There's also the book you probably heard of called Writer's Market.
Actually, I'll tell you a secret. I have my computer kind of like raised right now, and that's exactly what it's resting on. It's resting on, right? Because it's like the thickest book on my shelf. So
that's funny. He makes a good computer stand.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Writer's Market is a directory of hundreds of magazines that take freelance work, and it's a good start. They cannot possibly have all the markets because there are just too many.
But there's some really niche stuff in there as well.
Oh yeah, definitely a lot of interesting trade magazines. Mm-hmm. Like my husband wrote for one that's usually in there called Sheep with an exclamation point about sheep farming.
And what on earth did he write about?
He wrote a review of a board game about sheep. He's a board game guy.
Okay,
so this is a way that you can take an idea like board games and then twist it so that now it fits a sheep magazine. You know what I mean? It's just the possibilities are endless. Anyway, in terms of finding markets, look around you. Look at the doctor's office. Look at the hairdresser's waiting room. Look in your mailbox. A lot of people don't think about this, but I had one mentoring client who had an article idea, and I said, this would be perfect for this particular magazine. He said, I never even thought of it. I get it in my mailbox every month.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really great place to find custom magazines, which are magazines that are published for businesses that they use as marketing vehicles for their clients. So, for example, the magazine that you get at your supermarket or from your insurance company or from your bank, those are typically custom published. And there's a website called customcontentcouncil.org.
Okay, customcontentcouncil.org.
Yeah, it's a
Okay, fantastic.
membership site for custom publishing companies, and you can use them kind of as your own. It's not meant for writers, but you can use it to find magazines that you can pitch.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think this is excellent because I think what you bring up is really important, and that's, I mean, all of us want to be in O Magazine and Glamour and Self and, the big magazines that you would walk into a bookstore and be able to pick up. But what I would imagine, they make up such a tiny percentage of the magazines out there. And it's okay to be in Chic Magazine or, whatever, and be proud of that. And probably, your chances of getting in there are a lot higher. And
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
sorry,
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say I'm all about those types of magazines because if you want to write for a living and not just to see your byline, but for actual checks, you're not only going to be writing for those big magazines. You're not going to be writing only for Redbook and Family Circle and O and Real Simple and stuff like that. They are a major pain to break into. They are a major pain to write for. They tend to take a long time to pay. And I know hardly anybody who makes a living writing just from these magazines. The bread and butter is really these trade publications, custom publications, smaller publications that they might pay less per word, but on an hourly rate, you're making some pretty good money because they're so much easier.
Fantastic. Okay. And then can you talk a little bit about the editorial calendar and how you go about finding what the upcoming themes are and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the editorial calendar is actually something the magazine puts out that's meant for their advertisers. So the advertisers know what themes are coming up and they can fit their advertisements in the right issue. And you can find them usually on the magazine's website under the section for advertisers, and a lot of them just have it where you can download it, and it tells you what theme every issue is going to be for the next year or however many months. And so, for example, if you are looking at an editorial guideline and you see June, they're going to be doing healthy summer eating, you can then pitch ideas that fit into that theme. However, you need to think that these magazines are running at least 6 months in advance. So in June, you would be looking at Christmas. You know what I mean? You would be looking at December. You wouldn't be looking at July, August, September, typically.
Yeah, yeah. And this actually ties into my next question, which is, as an editor myself, I get, pitches all the time. And so often I get pitches for the issue that is coming out next week, and it drives me crazy. And it makes me really sad for the writer as well, that they've taken the time to do the research and they've taken the time to do the pitch, and there's no way I can run that article, even if it's a stellar, fantastic article.
But you know what? Can I ask you a question then?
Absolutely.
I think I get this question from a lot of writers and I don't know how to answer it. So it's February now. They have an idea that's perfect for March. They know it's too late. Do they send it to you and hope that you'll publish it next year, or do they wait a year and then send it 6 months in advance?
I would appreciate if they recognize the fact that it was kind of tardy and that they kind of knew the process, because I think part of what drives me mad is just how unprofessional it looks when they expect you to be working on such short deadlines. But I think what I would recommend would be to recognize that they know they're late, but to say, I have this article and I'd love for you to see it. And what sometimes happens is I do have an extra slot in there that I could squeeze it in, or
Interesting.
something else fell through, and actually this would be perfect, but it's too late for me to go and ask someone to write something for me.
Right.
So there's no harm in trying, and then why not repitch it a year later?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for answering my interview question.
So let's carry on this theme, because I know we could talk all day about this, about the do's and don'ts of pitching, and kind of coming full circle back to my very first question about querying. But I think it's just such an important question, the do's and don'ts of pitching, and that is one thing which, even if the pitch and the writer seem perfect, timing is going to blow your chances on that one. And there are several other things which I would say the writer could have gotten everything else perfect, but this one thing is going to blow their chances. What is that for you? What do you always tell people not to do when pitching an editor?
I always tell them, and this is huge with new writers, I tell them, don't tell the editor what you can't do. Don't focus on your weaknesses, focus on your strengths. It's a sales letter, and too many writers say, well, this is my first pitch, or I've never written for a magazine, or I wrote a long time ago, but I took off to raise my kids, or I've never written on this topic before. I mean, don't tell an editor these things. They don't need to know. If you blow them away with a really good pitch that shows your strengths, then you have an assignment. So
yeah, I think being self-deprecating has its time and place, but not when you're selling yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's a great one. Okay, what about the biggest do?
The biggest do isn't necessarily related to query writing in particular, but it's just to not let rejection get you down and to be really persistent. Because a lot of writers will send out one query to one place, they'll get it rejected, and then they give up. And the writers that succeed are not necessarily the best writers, but the ones who are not afraid to get their work out there and work through rejection. And I have to tell you, I've been doing this since 1997. I have had 500 ideas rejected. So meaning I've had way more than 500 rejections because each one was rejected by multiple people. But I did a count a few months ago because I was curious, and I had 500 ideas that had been rejected.
Wow.
And and I just kept going, and I ended, I made more sales than I got rejections, and I made a really good living that way. And you just can't give up early.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really encouraging. That's going to be really encouraging for a lot of writers watching this. I'm curious how you kept track of that. Do you have a spreadsheet that you track all of your pitches, or how do you know this?
I have a disorganized organizational system
Love
where whenever I wrote a query letter, I would put it in a folder with the name of the query on it, and then I would put it in a top folder called queries. And I basically went through that folder and counted all the ones I had that I knew I hadn't written, that I knew had not turned into articles, and there was 500.
Okay, great. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add that you think is really important that writers know?
Yeah, just in terms of rejection, you have to remember that it's nothing personal. New writers especially think that a rejection is a judgment on themselves as a person or as a writer, and really it's just a business decision. We already have this article in progress, or where the editorial staff is changing, or this isn't exactly the right time for it, or whatever the reason is. It's not a personal indictment of you as a writer. So you have to just push through it.
And would you say that even if the rejection comes back and it says it's not right for us, or it's something very vague that doesn't go into the specifics of why it's been rejected?
Yeah.
How do you handle that sort of rejection?
Yeah, and editors don't always tell you what it is because they get so many pitches, they just don't have time to give individual feedback. So if you get a nice rejection where they say this isn't quite right for us, but please pitch us again, that's kind of telling you, okay, I'm on the right track. If you get a form rejection, it could just mean the editor is really, really busy and she's going through a stack of query letters, and that's what you get. But if you are getting form rejection after form rejection, you need to maybe rethink your ideas or the way you're writing them, and maybe get some professional help with them.
Fantastic. Well, Linda, tell everybody where they can find you online.
Oh, at therenegadewriter.com.
Okay, and you offer ebooks and courses and more of this goodness that you've shared with us today.
Yep, all kinds of things. Ebooks, courses, free stuff. So come visit.
Fantastic. All right, thank you so much for talking with us today. That was
all right, thanks for having me.
Advice.
Thanks.
Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.